Round, round, get around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round. Good morning, Housing Minister. Thanks ever so much for joining
It's all
me
right.
today. And yeah, another glorious sunny day in the island of Jersey.
Absolutely.
We are very blessed. Um, so, what is your role as Housing Minister, and how is it all going?
So I'm a politician, basically, and I'm chosen by the public of Jersey to represent them in the states of Jersey. And then the states of Jersey chooses its ministers for the government to be the individuals who will take a lead on particular policy areas. So I got chosen as housing minister about 6 months ago. So my job is to bring forward law changes as we see them as necessary, to advocate for the kind of changes that we think we need to see to improve the housing situation in Jersey. And in terms of how it's all going, well, it's difficult, put it that way. Politics is a messy game often, and we don't all agree, and sometimes have to argue very ferociously about what we think the right thing to do is. And getting the money to affect the changes you want to can also be a struggle as well, when there's all sorts of other important issues going on, health, education, and the usual ones. But at the moment, things feel okay. It does feel like we're heading in the right direction.
That's good to hear. Can you provide an overview of the First Step scheme and its primary objectives?
Sure. So, first step, the clue is in the name, which is that it's about helping people get their first step on the property ladder. And it's specifically about trying to make home ownership possible for people who otherwise it would be impossible, because for whatever reason that they're just short of being able to afford a mortgage for their first home. This scheme steps in to provide equity loans with our partner Andium Homes to help people bridge that gap. So if they were 10, 20, maybe 40% short of what they needed, we'll step in to help them bridge that gap and get them onto the property ladder, which is such an important thing to help people with, and something that we know lots of islanders are struggling with. So it's a really important scheme.
We've had a few of our registered applicants purchase under the scheme.
Great.
And the first couple went through the last couple of weeks.
Brilliant.
Which is great to see.
Yeah, definitely.
How many first-time buyers applied for the first tranche of funding, and how many were successful, and what was the spread across different types of properties?
Yeah, so we had 125 applications for the first tranche, which was a lot. We were only able to accept 25 of those in the first tranche. Most of those who had applied were eligible. There were only a relatively small number that were discounted for not being eligible. So a lot of those who weren't successful in the first tranche was purely because it was limited in the amount of money there was for that first tranche. So I think that shows that there is at least quite significant demand for this kind of scheme. And I think we anticipated that it would largely be younger people looking to get a small home as their first step onto the property ladder, so a 1 or 2 bedroom flat. And that was pretty much what happened. It was almost all 1 and 2 bedroom flats. So now with the second tranche being decided at the moment, we're kind of hoping that we might do a little bit more on 3 bedroom homes through this scheme, so we can start getting a bit of a mix and understand and collect data on what kind of people are coming forward and understand what their needs are, in case there's anything we want to do in the future to adjust the scheme or change things to help more people.
The one thing that I've been mindful of is the maximum purchase price for a 1 bedroom flat or house under the scheme is 300,000. Considering this mostly includes converted non-purpose built apartments without parking, is there any plan to increase this beyond the current maximum price?
So not a plan as such, but the whole point of this first iteration of the scheme, it was initially put together as a pilot. So we're going to learn a lot from having done this. We're going to learn where the price pinch points really are, as opposed to where we think they are, and learn a bit more about the aspirations of people who do apply for the scheme, and then give us feedback as a result of it. So in the future, hopefully we can expand the scheme and do more with it. But we'll have learned a lot along the way, and if we need to adjust things like the maximum property purchase prices, or in fact any of the criteria, we will have opportunities to do that. It's not going to be set in stone forever.
Okay, that's good to know. I think it's safe to say it's acknowledged that the First Step scheme is insufficiently funded, with only £10 million available, which it's a big sum on its own. But when you're allocating against a certain number of beneficiaries, that can be absorbed fairly quickly, of course. Are there any plans to increase the funding to help more people in the future?
So I have to be slightly coy in answering this, because the government's putting its budget together at the moment, and we're not finished with that. But expanding the scheme is definitely something I want us to do. I've said that publicly quite a few times. I think even this early on into the scheme, I think we've demonstrated that it's a good scheme. It's the kind of thing that lots of people want, and we have had more demand for it than we're capable of satisfying at the moment. So if we were to get extra funding for it, it would be used and it would do good. The people who would be successfully applying for it, they'd be able to buy their first home where otherwise they wouldn't be able to, and that's a huge thing for people's lives, and the basis upon which they can grow and do all the other things they want to do with their lives. So if you're going to spend money, this is the kind of thing that really does provide a return that is unquantifiable in the benefits to the community. So I hope the rest of our politicians will see sense and see that it is worth putting more money into this.
Let's hope so. And the applicants that were unsuccessful, do they automatically roll on to the next tranche, or do they have to reapply?
They have to reapply, but they are proactively contacted by Andium Homes to let them know, sorry you weren't successful in the first tranche, but the next one's open now, so if you want to put your application in, you're more than welcome.
Super. What challenges have you faced with the First Step scheme so far, and how are you addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is the demand. There have been a lot of people applying for it, which at this point we don't have the funds to be able to satisfy every application. I think we kind of guessed that would probably be the case. I did have a hunch that this scheme would be popular, so I'm not too surprised by that. And the way to resolve that is to get more funding for it. So I've got to make the case for that. I think one of the other maybe slightly unexpected issues we had with it was the question of converted properties. So part of the aim with this funding is that we wanted to unlock chains, and we wanted to get further sales as a result, people moving on and selling to a First Step buyer. So we were hoping that that money would go to unlocking more chains like that. And so that's why we excluded brand new built homes from that, which I think was the right thing to do. But there were some people who were looking at homes that had been converted, so might have been a 2-bed before that had been converted to a large 1-bed or that kind of thing. And that was not done by the people who were living in it. It was done by an investor.
Okay.
So it wasn't really unlocking a chain in doing that. And I think we perhaps weren't clear enough on our communication on that point. So I think for future tranches, we've just got to make sure that people who have successful applications, we're not leading them on or letting them get their hopes up on a particular kind of property. So we've learned from that, I think. So yeah, it was a helpful learning curve.
No, just touching on that, I know I had a call from Andium about one of our purchases for an apartment, which is still yet to transact.
Okay.
The question was, how much work has been done to this apartment before it's gone on the market for sale?
Right.
And it was purchased as an investment property by one of my clients, which he had rented out for a duration. He needed the capital, and he had to put on the market, but to increase his chances of selling, he put a new kitchen in and a new flooring and so forth.
Right,
so
sure.
I can imagine it's quite a grey line there, where you need to absolutely define what people can and can't buy.
Absolutely.
And I think for us, managing our vendor expectations, when an offer's been accepted, in certain cases, which may be unique, they've taken a little bit longer than I might have anticipated.
Yeah, sure.
But from the point that somebody, from your cut-off date for applications, when does each applicant effectively get notified if they've been successful or not?
So I think it's 2 to 3 weeks after the closing date. So
Right.
so even if they got their application early in, they still have to wait for the closing date for all applications, and then it'll be a couple of weeks subsequent to that. So we've only just closed the second tranche, so it'll still be a couple of weeks now before Andy and have their chance to sift through all the applications and then get back to those who are successful.
Okay, that's great. And when's the third and final tranche of this scheme being released?
September.
And
so I'll have a bit of time in between the second and third to see are there any, again, more tweaks that we need to make for that third tranche based on how the second one goes.
Yeah.
And I've got no idea what we might do at that point. We really do have to see what the experience is this time round and see what we can do. But so, there might be some slight differences when it comes to that third one.
Have there been any discussions about any other types of scheme, like the old states loan scheme from the 70s, or?
Yeah, so not specifically like that kind of scheme. An equity loan scheme, I think, is a good iteration of a loan scheme that I'm really pleased with.
Mm-hmm.
But I think particularly through Andium, who are building a lot of homes and doing a good job at addressing the needs that there is for social rental homes, but at the same time producing some really good homes for first-time buyers as well. I think we're going to start thinking about how we might introduce some rent-to-buy schemes.
Okay.
So for people who perhaps early on in their adulthood aren't ready to buy a home or can't afford it, but perhaps with some kind of assistance or some scheme early on in their renting life, you might help them when they are ready to buy a home with something. So that's still early days and still a lot of work to do on that.
That's interesting. I think that would appeal to many.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Despite a record number of properties for sale on the market right now, affordability remains a major issue. We're experiencing an affordability crisis, I would suggest, rather than a housing crisis. What do you think?
I think it depends where you're coming from in the market, because if you can't afford housing, then it's both a housing crisis and affordability crisis for you. Whereas if you're in perhaps another part of the market, you're struggling to sell, for example, the way the crisis affects you is different. And I'm not really too fussed about the terminology. At the end of the day, we know that there are lots of people in Jersey who desperately need the right kind of homes for them, and however we want to term it, we've got to find the best way of making sure that everyone who's involved in providing housing in the island, whether that's the social sector or the private sector or government or whoever, is making sure that the number one thing we're considering is the needs of the people of Jersey, and making sure as many people on island can be happy and comfortable and in a position to thrive and contribute to our society and be happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's what we all want.
Absolutely.
Yes. What would you say to those who are concerned about how many flats are being built instead of affordable family homes?
Yeah, I think that's totally understandable. We're not building enough family-sized homes at the moment. We have plans to, and there are sites across the island that are designated to have new family-sized homes built on them. But that is being slow, and islanders can see with their eyes. You just have to drive through town and see the amount of apartments that are being built. And for those people who are at that point in their life where they're wanting to grow their families or have children, they can look at those kind of homes and think, well, that's not really for me. It's not my needs at this point.
Yes.
So I don't blame anyone for thinking that. And we do have to step up the amount of family-sized homes that are getting built. But it's not a bad thing to build 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, because they do suit a lot of people. And even if you're not buying one intending for it to be the place that you spend the majority of your adult life, even if it's just a first step onto the property ladder, it can be more affordable to do it that way than going straight into buying a 3-bedroom home with a garden and parking space. So you're at least setting yourself up and investing in your own capital to get there eventually. And there is a large waiting list for 1 and 2 bed flats. So we need both. It's not either or. I think it's my basic point there.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Sam. And for buyers out there, these apartments, a lot of them are out of reach. I mean, it's a global issue, not it's not a Jersey issue. Interest rates, affordability. It's affecting the world effectively, and rates will ultimately come down. But hopefully, all these apartments that are being built are going to be within reach potentially of those who are wanting to get onto the ladder, without necessarily the assistance of the first step scheme.
Exactly.
But I think the crazy days of post COVID where prices went through the roof, completely unprecedented, and took us all by surprise. You've mentioned a couple of the affordable rezoned sites, but there are fabulous looking family housing developments on the horizon, in both St John up at Zion and in St Peter. But many other rezones, affordable home sites are lying stagnant effectively. Is it the lack of infrastructure? Is that the reason that these are not being progressed, or the other reasons?
So that will be the case for some sites, and that's extremely frustrating. So I sat through the 2-week-long debate in the States where we debated rezoning these fields, and I think there's a great frustration that some of these sites were put forward without necessarily understanding that there were problems with infrastructure. There were capacity issues with the sewerage, for example. If there's no capacity in a sewer, you cannot build a new home on it because the toilet won't flush. So issues like that we weren't aware of, which is really disconcerting. So the infrastructure minister's got a heck of a job ahead of him now to try to resolve some of those issues as quickly as possible. And I know that he considers that a very serious priority, and he's very, very keen to unlock these sites and get them in use as soon as possible. But there are still a few sites, though, where discussions are starting to take place. Providers are starting to come forward to put their visions together for what they'll put on those. That's all behind the scenes at the moment, so we can't see it and can't visualize it yet. But I'm hopeful, and over the next couple of years, we will get those sites and spades in the ground, and people eventually living in those homes and having happy lives.
But one would expect to create this infrastructure comes at great cost. Who does that cost fall to? Is it the landowner? Is it the developer, or what?
So that's a good question. If you put it all on the landowner or the developer, it's going to be harder to keep those homes affordable because of their own margins in delivering that. There is, I think, quite a reasonable view that basic infrastructure like sewerage is a community thing. It's not a specific person or a specific business. So should it be all of us as taxpayers who fund a lot of that? There have been some discussions about how we fund waste disposal and sewerage, and that I think would be more government side than private sector side. But it may vary depending on particular sites, how far away they are to the main drains and that kind of thing, and what contribution they might expect developers to make to meet the government part of the way. But thankfully, that's above my pay grade because I wouldn't want to be involved in those kind of negotiations.
I'm sure. Is anything happening to accelerate the advance of the development of these sites, creating that infrastructure? When could people occasionally expect to hear any more on this?
So I'm hoping the infrastructure minister and perhaps the environment minister might be in a position as soon as possible to start saying that. We know that the process of getting planning approval can be quite difficult sometimes as well. And in recent years in particular, I think people have observed some of the dysfunctionality in the system, and that doesn't help either. I know the environment minister is knocking heads together to try to overcome some of those boundaries, and that will make some of that quicker as well. But hopefully he'll be able to update us relatively soon on what he's managed to do there.
Good. I've got another question for you on that later.
Okay.
When the last Bridging Island plan was done, there was the government undertook to build an additional 1,000 new affordable family homes on rezoned sites by 2025. These delivery expectations obviously aren't going to happen, and we know generally why. The lack of understanding of the infrastructure of specific sites which got rezoned. Will there be a delay for the next island plan? I can imagine there would be.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there was, because we've spoken a little bit about COVID, the impact that that's had, and all the rest of it. It's also had quite a drastic impact on our population projections. For pretty much all of my life, Jersey's population has been growing at reasonably fast rates, often well above government projections, which has been difficult when it's come to planning for school places or that kind of infrastructure that's really important. But for the first time in my life, our population's now falling, which poses a completely different set of problems and things to overcome. But one of the things it probably has done is it's probably wrecked our projections for future housing need, which means we're going to need to reevaluate that, because there is quite a complex science behind those figures and how we kind of work out how many 3-bed homes we might need, how many 1-bedroom flats we might need, how many retirement homes we might need. So a lot of those figures, because of that quite drastic change in the population landscape, are probably very out of date now. So when we get to the point of doing a new island plan, the picture is not going to be what we thought it would be by that time. And in a sense, when it comes to delivering the number of homes, that's probably helpful, because there's slightly less pressure than there otherwise would have been. If the population were growing faster whilst homes weren't being built at the speed, that would be causing real hardship and problems with affordability, no doubt, as well. So the fact that population growth has kind of reversed a bit does take a little bit of the heat out of that, which is probably quite helpful, but it poses different challenges that government's going to have to sit down and get through.
Yeah. And will there be invitations again? I'm assuming there will be, for landowners to come forward for rezoning sites. I mean, there might be some sites out there which are prime and potentially with infrastructure, which developers could potentially start on sooner than perhaps some of the other sites. Could that be an option for people to approach yourselves at this stage? Or
I would have thought so. And some of the parishes, I thought, did quite a good job last time in identifying the spaces in their communities that they thought would be appropriate for that, and they did quite good public consultation with their parishioners as well. Because we've all heard the term NIMBY, and on a small island, to find land that isn't going to disturb anyone whilst it's being used is not particularly easy to do. But as a community, we've got to look out for one another, and just because you're happy and comfortable in your home doesn't mean somebody else shouldn't have a fair shot at finding their own home as well. So I think learning from that process last time to find places that the community can have real buy-in and believe that, that's a good use of that site, that will, provide a nice environment for families to live in. I'd imagine that'll be a big part of that next process.
Okay. Can you outline the proposed changes to the island's residential tenancy legislation and explain what these changes mean for both landlords and for tenants?
Yeah, so this is a big priority for me this year. We have a residential tenancy law that governs how rental contracts work between landlords and tenants, and it's quite out of date and it's quite thin as well. And I think we've learned in the last 11 years or so that there are some bad practices that have been creeping in that the current law is not fit to overcome. the vast majority of landlords and tenants get on perfectly well together, do a perfectly decent job, and people have happy lives in their homes, and landlords have good relations with their tenants. But I think that there are some expectations that in this day and age we need to adjust. I know of examples of people who have faced multiple rent increases in a year at very short notice. I know of people who have had rent increases imposed on them at such short notice that they've actually been unable to pay because they've already committed to their other bills and not been able to plan. That's not too widespread, but it can happen, and it can happen because the law doesn't stop it from happening. So I want a law in place that's going to outlaw some of those more unjustifiable rental practices. But I think one of the key things I want to get done in that is to provide a kind of tenancy tenure that is fit for people who are living for the long term in the private rental sector, rather than constantly having short-term contracts that they could fear could be ended for no reason, at relatively short notice or at particular intervals, which makes it difficult for people to plan for their lives, know whether they can afford to save away to buy their own home, or know that they can afford to have a child or what have you.
Yes.
So it's kind of moving to a little bit more of the European model, where lots of people are perfectly happy living in the private rental sector. They can live their entire lives there because they know they've got security and affordability. And if we can have a law in place that helps manage landlords' expectations on that as well, will, I hope, modernise the private rental sector and make it somewhere that people are a bit more comfortable to live in, because that is going to be a significant form of tenure for many people across the island who either aren't living in social housing or can't afford to buy their own home.
We've, as estate agents, we at the Rossman Estate certainly have observed an increasing number of landlords looking to sell or considering looking to sell, and a near zero influx of new landlords in the buy-to-let market since the 3% increase in stamp duty at the end of 2022 for second properties. It's anticipated that rents will increase significantly if this is sustained. Are you all aware of any rumblings about stamp duty reduction potentially, and the possibility of reintroducing investors back into the market?
Yeah. The short answer to that's no. I don't think that that's on the horizon. Certainly not in the short term. Certainly not in the short term. I think my position is I want to see how things go for a bit longer, because the point of the stamp duty surcharge was that it was meant to put off investors. It was meant to reduce that aspect of demand in the hope that it would put those aspiring homeowners in a better position, not having people competing with them to buy homes. So I'd like to see how that goes, certainly for a bit longer. And I got to say then, this is just my view, but I'm not convinced that it will lead to massive increases in rents. I think that things will stabilise eventually. And I think that more renters, if we are successful with the schemes we're doing to help people buy, and that prices do, at the very least, stabilise or come down, will hopefully turn renters into homeowners, which is where a lot of them actually want to be, and they'll have better opportunities there. So I appreciate it's a tricky time at the moment, especially with the low turnover of properties. But I think if we hold out for a bit longer, we'll find an equilibrium that will suit people a bit better than what we had previously, where prices really were going up at unsustainable rates.
Yeah, so what we're witnessing at the moment is very few viewings of apartments generally. The only first-time buyers we see are the ones who are benefiting under the first step scheme, or who are getting the benefit from family assistance.
Right.
With no investors and no first-time buyers buying these apartments, I think it's going to have an impact on 1 and 2 bedroom prices long term. And the advice that we're giving to our clients is, it's our duty to get as much as we possibly can from the best possible buyer to suit your own unique time frames. But realistically, it's so competitive out there. If you're going on the market, your property needs to stand out for the crowd.
Sure.
And generally, that's price driven. So we're advising a lot of our clients, okay, it might not be ideal, but if you can afford to accept a lower sales price for your apartment, which enables you to make the next step, then we would urge you to consider that.
Yeah.
Anybody who's in a position whereby, you know, they've rented out that property previously as an investment property, who've since decided to sell, you know, we're now advising them perhaps it's better to go back on the rental market for another year or so, and wait for the market to recover. You know, most activity we're seeing at the moment is over 1.25, over the 1.5 mark.
Right.
The inquiries that we're getting from people looking to purchase in the relatively short-term future, between 800 and 1.5 million, and between 1 million and 3 million. So no, it's incredibly difficult, and no one quite knows what's going to happen next. But obviously, rate decreases are hopefully pending soon, and we all watch that with bated breath. A major barrier to residential development on the island, and you touched on it earlier, is the lengthy processing time for planning applications. Are there any signs of hope for improvements or changes in the department? You mentioned there were some heads being knocked together. Should I like to explain a little bit more about what's happening there and what people could potentially be looking forward to? The old fast track systems dropped away. That would be a nice thing to introduce again.
So this is definitely something that's caused frustration. I'm sure you're picking up on lots of it. Me as well. I think there's been a widespread view that there's been some dysfunctionality in the planning system. Lots of people have had a lack of clarity, but also I think some people have felt that, doing the work to put a planning application together and doing it in good faith and wanting a good outcome at the end of it, and then finding that somewhere along the line, it turns out the advice you got on something wasn't quite where it ought to have been, or your expectations of how or when things needed to be achieved in that process wasn't quite right. It does nothing but put barriers in the way of people trying to do the right thing and trying to get on with it. And that's bad for the whole island, because we want new homes being built. We want people living in the best homes possible. So the new Environment Minister, who's got responsibility for the planning system, when he took office earlier this year, I think said that he was pretty keen to knock some heads together and try to break down some of those barriers. So that's his job rather than mine, thankfully. But I know that he's made that a significant priority, and I'm sure that he'll be updating us relatively soon about how we might manage to get that. But I think it's important for people who are not going to wait for it to be completely fixed because they want to get on with things now, is to firstly always make sure that you go in as early as possible to get your pre-application advice from the department if you can, and try your best to take it into account, because there'd be nothing worse than putting a lot of effort into something and then finding out, if you'd have known one thing, you could have avoided having to waste months on having to amend it and all the rest, and all the frustrations that must cause.
Okay. Perhaps I'll get him in my car at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
And get our heads together. Given the emphasis on modern methods of construction and energy efficiency in the latest Bridging Island plan, what actions are the government taking to ensure progress in delivering this type of construction method?
So, where we are, we're just round the corner from the Limes at the moment, which used, I think, slightly more. They were experimenting with different construction methods to what they've used before, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to have a good look at it, but it's very impressive, and people are moving into those homes as we speak and are speaking highly of them. The design seems to be a bit Marmite. Some people aren't particularly keen on it, and some people quite like it. I quite like it, but I think part of that is its location. It's next to a roundabout, whereas if you dropped it in the middle of agricultural land, that would be, I think, a bit unpalatable. So that, as an experiment from the Andium side, has gone pretty well. So they'll have my support if they're looking at going even further on some of that. When it comes to the rezoned sites, when they're looking to build family homes, again, from the Andium side, I'll encourage them to do what they can to adopt methods that are as quick and efficient and cost effective as well, which some of these modern methods can contribute to. I might be being naive here, but I'm kind of hoping that because it makes so much sense to build homes as quickly, efficiently, and decently as possible, that there shouldn't be anybody who wants to stop that from happening and saying, no, you must do this slower and more expensive. So I'm kind of hoping that when private developers come forward and say, this is how we want to do it, and it's going to look nice, it's going to be quick, it's going to do everything it needs to do. I'm hoping that planning or whatever other government department won't get in the way and say, no, we don't support this, because, as you say, it is in the Bridging Island plan that we're meant to be supporting that kind of thing. So, but it's still relatively new. So as cases start coming through where they're pushing the boundaries of what we've done previously, I think government ministers will need to be alive to that and supportive when it's appropriate.
And potentially fast track these technologies, but I know that's incredibly difficult.
Sure.
We, as in not my estate agency, but me and my business partner on the modern methods of construction side, as you're probably aware, I've been away to Europe with a number of your predecessors,
sure,
and local developers, and a couple of chief ministers as well. But we've now devised or working with a company in the UK using European technology, and they have a European factory and so forth. They're building a lot in the UK and across Europe. They're using a BOPAS accredited mortgageable properties, which we could adopt here, that could expand as families grow. So you might want to start off with a 2-bedroom house, becomes a 3-bedroom house. May not be able to afford a garage at this stage. That could be added on at a later stage. I will be seeking government and community support in due course for this, potentially through reintroducing some shared equity scheme or state loan scheme like we saw in the 70s, self-building up at Filder Bocage and so forth. Private investment or other initiative. We know there's a number of sites, I think it's 9 plus or minus sites out there, which could be incredible once all the infrastructure's in place, or work with partners to get that infrastructure in place, to create actual affordable homes and new family communities. We're confident we can make this happen, make this vision a reality, but it's going to need a strong wind behind us. And we faced hurdles along the way. We were looking at modular construction, which is still very much something we're exploring. Joe's development company, we're exploring modern methods for the waterfront using modular technology. So I think it is the future. These kind of products have been mortgageable all over Europe for the last 30-40 years, and chatting again with Peter Seymour the last couple of weeks, the obstacle has been you can't get funding for the build. You can only get funding at the very end for a traditional mortgage if it's insurable, but there's it's very much risk based. If you've got a wedge of cash and you aren't reliant on a traditional mortgage and you just want to build, you could be building products which isn't mortgageable at the end of it, or isn't saleable at a later date. So those are the obstacles I think facing the wider population. But this BOPAS accredited product we found is incredible. the company we're using has been over to the island several times in the last few weeks. They're looking at various projects that myself and my business partner on that are involved in, and for apartment buildings, it's a very viable option, and it's our roles, I think, to educate people and yourselves and the planning department and whomever we need to that these aren't post-war thrown up prefabs. They're proper homes that you wouldn't be able to distinguish from more traditionally built homes, and there are infrastructure options whereby solar panels, which I know you guys would encourage. You could have drainage systems operating. The units could almost be self-sufficient. So if there was a way for somebody to acquire a plot of land on one of these rezoned sites, the option to self-build could become a very realistic proposition, which was extremely successful in the 70s. And I know, again, from chatting with Peter, Seymour, and with others, that they'd like to see the return of such a scheme. But nothing happens overnight in Jersey, and I think community support and with the government embracing it, and yourself as housing minister, you have to start somewhere.
Sure, absolutely.
So, I'm sure you would like to see more of these types of constructions.
Yeah, definitely. They're exciting opportunities, and at the end of the day, there's lots of other issues facing us as a community at the moment. Climate change now, carbon neutral drive as well. And if homes are being built more efficiently, then you're killing two birds with one stone there, giving someone a decent home and something that's better for the environment as well. So there's all these different angles to consider in all of that. And at the end of the day, if it works, great.
Yeah. Another angle I'm looking at as well is, I've been incredibly busy with valuations more so, and trying to keep my business going in what's been a tough couple of years for all estate agents. No one ever feels sorry for estate agents, put it that way. But,
well, they feel even less sorry for politicians.
But no, it has been tough. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. I need to knock it down. I want to meet with individual parishes. I want to meet with others within the government to potentially look at village sites like St Martin's, St Peter's, where you've got the infrastructure kind of there already, to drop in these modular units, which would encourage entrepreneurship within the parish. People could rent them as pop-up shops for a duration.
Right, sure.
Anyone feeling a bit lonely in the parish that wants to have a cup of tea and a slice of cake, can jump on a community parish bus and go and sit with others. Just to encourage community aspects back into parish life and help parishes sculpt and recreate their own historic identities, and which I think is very much fallen away. You've got great community down in St Aubin and in other pockets around the island, but I think to create like a central hub with three or four of these modular units, which can be lifted and moved to other destinations or used for hospitality events, or it's an angle we're looking at the moment, and how that would be funded, whether it's by parishioners and they get some return on others investing in that. It's an angle we're looking at and keep to explore. And there's one or two government members which I'll be having a chat to about in due course. But we're both as Jersey as you can get, and it's a shame to see a lot of people leaving the island or considering leaving the island, particularly the younger generations.
Absolutely.
Pre-COVID, a lot of the valuations we were doing were for people who unfortunately having relationship issues and going in other directions. But I think I've mentioned before that people seem to be a lot more tolerable of each other post-COVID in their relationships.
Sure.
One of the driving forces for valuations these days is to perhaps cash in on their property, which has increased significantly in value since they purchased years ago. Go and purchase something outright in the UK or in
Yeah,
Europe.
yeah.
And be mortgage free and have a chunk of capital
Yeah.
and help their children out to purchase. But a lot of valuations we're doing are from people considering leaving the island. So I think what you're introducing and the angles you're looking at can only be a good thing. There's perhaps other schemes out there which could be looked at,
Definitely.
and whether there needs to be private investment as well. That's yet to be seen. But is there anything that we haven't discussed today which you would like to perhaps raise?
One thing that is, I mean, I've had my 3 pillars of my policy platform, and I think we've gone through 2 of those, which is to help more islanders into home ownership and make the experience of renters much better as well. But the third one, just to touch on very briefly, I guess, was the issue of homelessness on the island, which we're a very wealthy island, and we don't, on a day-to-day basis, see homelessness in Jersey. But it does exist, and we do have charities that are doing absolutely amazing work, but are strained because of the level of demand that they get. So, alongside all of the important stuff on improving conditions for renters and helping people own their homes, I think as a wealthy island, we can do a lot better when it comes to supporting people who are at risk of homelessness. And if more islanders are in decent homes that they can afford, they're less likely to become homeless. But for those who have some kind of crisis in their life that's not necessarily connected to affordability, we've got to make sure our government services are ready to step up and support those people, get them the help they need. You know, it might be a health issue that means they can't work and all of a sudden have lost a load of their income. It might be a relationship breakdown and one person doesn't have housing qualifications or that kind of thing. So there's some stuff we need to be doing there, and improve the services that government provides. And if in the next few years we can say, we've helped more people into home ownership, renters are more comfortable, and fewer people are at risk of homelessness, I think that'll be something to celebrate. And hopefully that's the direction of travel we're going on now.
Let's hope so. There's people out there in some desperate situations.
Absolutely.
There's been a couple of times where we've been invited out to valuations. I've got like a pre-planning team as part of my the Rossmore Estate setup. Anybody considering extending their home, what would it be worth if we did this? Do we sell? Do we achieve this? Buy something which has got this already, or can we do this? And occasionally, you've got a grandson or a family member that says, "Oh, my family's got some land, which to save me leaving the island, I'd love to build one of your modular properties on family land." It'd be nice where there is, within reason, sufficient land. It doesn't impact too much on the landscape or anything. Potential for these local families or people who've moved to the island who've been unable to get the ladder to perhaps have these potential opportunities. I think it's quite a black and white yes or no from the planning department based on current policies, but it'd be nice to see an element of flexibility. Obviously we see some large housing developments go up which raise eyebrows in certain locations. I mean, you've got Portland Bay. The waterfront's not everyone's cup of tea. If someone wants to build a one-bedroom, tucked away from the road, no one's going to see it. I think elements like that perhaps ought to be looked at as well to encourage home ownership that way without perhaps losing some of these youngsters and not so young to other jurisdictions. There's no easy answer. Everyone thinks they've got the answer. Everyone's very vocal on social media, but everyone's very quick to jump on what people say, and you're never going to please everyone all the time. But your heart's certainly in the right place, and hopefully you can make a difference. And I'm not this ogre or an estate agent. I'm a local lad, and I want to see islanders and flourish as you do. So yeah, let's all keep heading in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And see what the next few years bring. And best of luck for the rest of your term.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. But whilst we've got you in the car, yeah, I know you're a very avid and talented musician, having seen you play firsthand at the charity events I do every year for Healing Waves, the
Absolutely.
La Rossell States White Collar Surfing Competition, and annually I hold my surf festival. And yeah, I thought you and your band were incredible on stage, and you played last year, and see you had a good gig
Oh,
a couple of weeks
absolutely.
ago. So
Yeah.
you can let your hair down occasionally.
Absolutely. Surfest was great, and the Water Splash as a venue, it's wonderful to play at, especially in summer, where you're on stage, people in front of you are having a great time, and to your left, you have one of the most beautiful sights on the planet, this spectacular beach and sunset.
It's gorgeous.
Stuff like that reminds you how lucky we are to live in an island like this, how special it is. And I find the older I get, the more I appreciate it as well. So, the more stuff we've got going on like that, supporting a great charity, encouraging people to be creative and get involved with music. There's a lot of talent on the island in that area. And that's one of the things that makes life special. And, without the music, I've got no idea where I'd be. But being in politics and having something to do on the side to relax and let your hair down is absolutely vital.
It's a regret of mine. I started learning the guitar when I was 10, had a few lessons at the art centre, and did a small gig, if you like, as 10-year-olds to poor listeners. And but yeah, regrettably, I stopped when I was 10 and a half to concentrate on my sport. And yeah, a big regret of mine not continuing that. But who are your influences?
All the old school stuff. Jimmy Page / Brian May. All of that old school rock and roll stuff was the stuff that my parents would always have on in the car, and you just pick up on it. But the band that actually got me going was The Darkness, because their debut album came out when I was 13 years old. Absolutely perfect. And they've just been announced that they'll be playing in Jersey at the end of the month. It took me approximately 0.37 seconds to buy my ticket after that announcement. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, weekend of the first week of September.
Yeah,
that'll be a good event in a new venue this year.
Yeah, indeed.
Fabulous. Well, thanks ever so much.
No, thank you.
Again, housing Minister Sam Mezec, and I'll leave you go and do some work now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again.